Klara Hitler was the very picture of an obedient, devout 19th-century Austrian mother. Soft-spoken, deeply religious, and fiercely protective of her children, she was the kind of woman who would be forgotten by history, if not for the son she raised. Born Klara Polzel, she was both niece and third wife to Alois Hitler, her much older cousin and a man infamous for his cruelty. It was a marriage that skirted the lines of legality and shattered them morally. Klara endured Alois's beatings in silence, bore the loss of multiple children, and clung to faith while her husband dominated every corner of their grim household. Of her 6 children, only 2 survived, Adolf and Paula. Klara poured her entire soul into Adolf, calling him "my little Adi" long after he was grown. She catered to his every whim, even when it became clear his behavior was strange, violent, detached. She died in agony from breast cancer in 1907. Adolf, then 18, reportedly wept inconsolably, but something changed in him after. Many say her death hardened him, closed the last door to empathy. Whether Klara was blind to what her son would become, or a quiet enabler in a household of authoritarian rot, we may never know. But one fact remains. From the sterile rooms of Brown Am Inn, a mother's suffering birthed the man who would become history's greatest villain. Letizia Remolino Bonaparte was not the nurturing mother you might expect of a future emperor. She was fire-forged, molded by the brutal landscape of Corsican rebellion and family survival. Born in 1750 to minor Corsican nobility, Letizia married Carlo Bonaparte at just 14. They had 13 children. 8 survived, but none loomed larger than their second son, Napoleon. Letizia was only 19 when Napoleon was born amid civil unrest and French invasion. She carried her son through fields of cannon fire and famine, once walking 40 miles to safety with a musket strapped to her back. She was stern, superstitious, and unflinching, traits she passed down. She showed little outward affection, believing indulgence was a path to ruin. Napoleon later claimed, "I owe my fortune to my mother's firmness." But there was more. Letizia supported his early ambitions. Yet when he crowned himself emperor in 1804, she refused to attend. "God gave, and God can take away," she muttered. Even as her son conquered Europe, Letizia remained distant, living modestly in Rome. She kept his siblings in check, ruled over the Bonaparte clan like a mafia matriarch, and saw herself not as the emperor's mother, but as the reason he became one. Historians debate whether Letizia pushed her son toward greatness or tyranny. What's clear is this: her cold practicality, her refusal to pamper, her survival instincts, all shaped the psyche of a man who believed himself born to rule. She was the whisper behind the throne, the steel behind the crown. Before Russia had czars, it had Olga. And before Olga became a saint, she became a butcher. Widowed young in 945 CE, her husband, Prince Igor of Kiev, was murdered by the Drevlians, a rival tribe. The Drevlians then made the mistake of offering Olga marriage to their prince, assuming she'd be desperate and submissive. Olga responded by burning their entire delegation alive. Then she asked for a second envoy. When they arrived, she offered a bathhouse and locked them inside, setting it ablaze. When that didn't satisfy her grief, she visited the Drevlian capital under the pretense of peace, only to massacre thousands at her husband's funeral feast. Her final revenge? She asked for tribute in the form of doves and pigeons, then tied sulfur-soaked cloth to their legs and released them back to their homes. The sky rained fire. Every rooftop in the Drevlian capital ignited. The city burned. But Olga wasn't just vengeance in human form. She stabilized Kievan Rus, implemented the first system of tax collection, and helped establish centralized rule. And then, in an eerie twist, she converted to Christianity and was canonized decades later as Saint Olga, the woman who paved the road to Russian Orthodoxy with blood. Her son, Sviatoslav, grew up in her shadow, raised not by a gentle hand, but by a woman who taught him that mercy was weakness. He became a ruthless warlord, obsessed with conquest. Olga wasn't just his mother, she was his blueprint. History calls her Bertrada the Broad-footed, but that detail is a distraction. Her real legacy? Giving birth to Charlemagne, father of Europe, Holy Roman Emperor, and architect of centuries of conquest. Bertrada of Leon was no mere consort. She was a queen-maker. Born into nobility in 720 CE, Bertrada married Pepin the Short, a man of ambition who wanted more than the title of mayor of the palace. She wasn't just his wife, she was his political co-conspirator. When Pepin plotted to depose the last Merovingian king, it was Bertrada who ensured papal support. In return, her children were baptized by the Pope himself. Divine legitimacy sealed, but the crown came at a cost. Bertrada had multiple children, but it was Charlemagne, who consumed her attention. After Pepin's death, the kingdom was split between Charles and his brother Carloman. The brothers despised each other, and civil war loomed. Bertrada didn't plead for peace. She chose a side, Charles's, and played a dangerous game of diplomacy and betrayal. She traveled between courts, undermined Carloman's support, and built strategic alliances that favored her favorite son. When Carloman died mysteriously just a few years later, Charles inherited everything. Some whispered that Bertrada's hands were not as clean as they appeared. Under her guidance, Charlemagne became not just a king, but a holy emperor. His wars reshaped Europe. His conquests spread blood and faith in equal measure. And behind the curtain was Bertrada, mother, power broker, and master manipulator. She wasn't cruel. She was calculating. And in her world, legacy mattered more than love. Born Louise of Baden, a mild-mannered German princess, she became Yelizaveta Alexeyevna, the empress consort of Russia. Her marriage to Tsar Alexander I was a cold transaction. She brought the German bloodline and beauty. He brought a nation teetering on madness. Together, they birthed the man who would murder Napoleon's dream and doom his own family, Grand Duke Konstantin Pavlovich. But there was rot behind the Winter Palace walls. Alexander was aloof and unfaithful. Yelizaveta suffered miscarriages and buried children before their time. Her court was a cage of whispering courtiers and suffocating protocol. She fell into an affair with a military officer. Some believe her only surviving child wasn't even Alexander's. Then came the blood. Her son, Constantine, was raised on violence. The boy adored military uniforms and war games from toddlerhood. As he grew, so did his brutality. He beat soldiers. He lashed servants. He ruled Poland with an iron hand, crushing revolts and earning a name whispered in fear, the Russian Hammer. Yelizaveta watched in horror as the empire twisted under her son's rage and her husband's guilt. Alexander, tormented by what he had allowed, grew reclusive, obsessed with death. He died young, leaving chaos behind. Yelizaveta outlived both men. She died alone, plagued by rumors, broken by grief, and haunted by the knowledge that the monster she birthed was shaped not just by Russia, but by her silence. History remembers Pauline Bonaparte for her beauty, her scandalous affairs, and the marble statues sculpted from her naked body. But behind the central mythology was a deeper truth. Pauline wasn't just Napoleon's little sister. She was the only woman he ever truly feared, and possibly the one who understood him best. Born in 1780, Pauline grew up alongside Napoleon in Corsica. Their bond was unnaturally close. She called him my little Caesar. He called her the only man in the family. While their mother, Letizia, preached austerity, Pauline indulged in excess, draped in silk, seducing diplomats, and dancing barefoot at imperial balls. But she was also fiercely loyal. When Napoleon demanded obedience, his other siblings schemed. Pauline obeyed. She gave up lovers, titles, even her dignity to support him. She followed him into exile, defended him against betrayal, and scorned anyone who dared speak against him. Some say she encouraged his worst impulses, that her flattery fed his delusions, that in moments of crisis, she whispered not peace, but conquest. Pauline wasn't a ruler, but she played the role of queen, advising, manipulating, and always orbiting Napoleon's rising and falling star. After his final defeat at Waterloo, Pauline faded into obscurity. She died of tuberculosis at just 45. Napoleon once called her his only true ally. Maybe she was. Maybe that's what makes her so chilling. Because Pauline didn't just witness her brother's descent into tyranny. She cheered on. Empress Shokin, born Masako Ichijo in 1849, was no typical Japanese consort. She married the Meiji Emperor during Japan's transformation from feudal isolation to modern militarism, a shift she watched, encouraged, and quietly shaped. And though she bore no children herself, her influence helped mold the most destructive lineage Japan would ever know. Shokin came from a noble line, steeped in ancient court rituals and Confucian silence. But she quickly adapted to the new Japan rising around her. She cast off traditional garb for Western gowns. She sat beside her husband in public, a first for a Japanese empress, and took an active role in charities and state matters. Beneath the public grace, however, was a fierce nationalistic streak. She believed deeply in a modern, unified Japan, and the military was its engine. Under her symbolic patronage, war became sanctified. The imperial army wasn't just a fighting force. It was a divine instrument of destiny. Shokin toured hospitals, wrote poetry glorifying sacrifice, and became the spiritual mother of a militarized nation. She helped fund the Red Cross and military schools. Her quiet approval became gospel. Though she had no children by blood, she was mother in spirit to a generation of boys trained not for peace, but for empire. Among them, Hirohito, future Emperor Showa, under whose name World War II atrocities would unfold. Shokin died before the firestorms of Nanking and Hiroshima, but her fingerprints were on the sword that fell. Not all monsters are born. Some are raised in silence, and some are shaped by women who believed they were saving their country, when in fact they were sealing its fate. Catherine de Medici didn't want to be a monster's mother. But when your sons are weak kings, your court is full of vipers, and your country teeters on the edge of religious war, monsters become tools. Born in Florence in 1519 to the powerful but feared Medici banking dynasty, Catherine was orphaned young and raised in convents. At 14, she was married off to the French Prince Henri. It was a political bargain, a wealthy commoner girl made queen. When Henri died suddenly, Catherine was left with 10 children and a fractured kingdom. She ruled through them. First her son Francis II, then Charles IX, then Henry III. None were strong enough to hold France together, so Catherine did it for them. Through poison, bribery, and careful orchestration, she became known as the Serpent Queen. She arranged political marriages, played Protestants and Catholics against each other, and used fear like a scalpel. But her darkest hour came in 1572, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Catherine allegedly gave the order, or at least allowed it. Thousands of Huguenots, French Protestants, were butchered in the streets of Paris. Blood soaked the Seine. Her son, King Charles IX, never recovered. Some say the screams of the dying haunted him until he coughed up his own lungs in madness. Catherine did it to protect her sons, to keep the crown, to preserve France. But what she preserved was power, soaked in horror. She died alone, hated by many, feared by more. Not every monster is born screaming. Some come from the arms of a mother who would do anything, to keep her children on the throne. Before George Washington was the father of his country, he was the son of Mary Ball Washington, a woman as iron-willed as she was emotionally impenetrable. She didn't raise a revolutionary. She raised a statue, and that statue learned early. Emotions were weaknesses to be buried deep. Mary was widowed when George was just 11. Unlike most colonial widows, she refused to remarry. She kept full control of her estate, her children, and her rigid worldview. She ruled her household with military discipline. George was taught to bow, to speak when spoken to, and to obey absolutely. She never praised him. She never hugged him. Historians have long debated whether her coldness hardened Washington's legendary self-control or hollowed him out entirely. As a teenager, George begged to join the Royal Navy. Mary said no. He stayed. When he left to survey the wilderness, he wrote long letters home. She rarely responded. Even during the Revolution, while her son starved at Valley Forge, Mary petitioned Congress for financial aid, claiming George refused to support her. She never visited Mount Vernon. She didn't attend his inauguration. Yet when she died, Washington buried her with full honors, called her the most revered woman I have ever known, and wept privately. Maybe he believed it. Maybe he said it because that's what duty demanded. Mary Ball Washington didn't raise America's ideal leader. She forged him from absence, control, and silence. She carved a mask into her son's soul, one that smiled, led, and never flinched, even as it cracked. No mother in history has been credited or blamed for the making of a conqueror quite like Olympias, the mother of Alexander the Great. And with good reason. She didn't just raise a king. She raised a living god. Born around 375 BCE in Epirus, Olympias was not meek. She was a priestess of Dionysus, a snake worshipper, and a queen with ambitions far beyond her station. Married to King Philip II of Macedon, she was never loved, but she was feared. Philip had other wives. Olympias had only one child, Alexander. And from the moment he was born, she told him he was not just royal, he was divine. She whispered to him that he was the son of Zeus, not Philip. That fire danced the night he was born. That fate had chosen him. She nurtured his pride, his ruthlessness, his god complex. She scorned Philip's infidelities and told her son that Macedon was his alone to inherit. After Philip was mysteriously assassinated, possibly at her order, Olympias swept her 20-year-old son onto the throne and began purging rivals. One by one, his half-siblings were murdered. Alexander's stepmother, burned alive. The message was clear. This was Olympias' son, and no one else's. As Alexander swept across Persia, Egypt, and Asia, Olympias ruled at home with equal ferocity. When he died, she claimed control of his bastard son and executed dozens to keep power in the family. She died the way she lived, defiant, hacked to death by an army she once commanded, unrepentant until the end. Behind every god, there is a believer. Behind every tyrant, a hand that shaped the crown. Olympias wasn't just the mother of Alexander the Great. She was the architect of his legend, and the shadow beneath it.